Some journeys don't lead to places, but to buried truths. Hello, my friends. If you are a mystery enthusiast, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, okay? And remember to like and subscribe to the channel. London's Euston Station lay shrouded in a chilly fog on that February morning in 1947. The tracks shook with the muffled roar of the steam locomotive as it prepared to set off north on its 18-hour journey to Inverness. The Invernessian Express was known for its understated elegance and its select passengers: diplomats, academics, elegant widows, decadent poets, and souls fleeing from a dark past. Among them, Lady Vivian Marlowe, wrapped in a dark wool coat and black leather gloves, and with eyes that held the weight of dead loves and unspoken secrets, boarded carriage number 3. Her ticket mentioned no destination, but in her hand was a letter bearing the crest of a vanished family. A summons, perhaps, or a farewell. On the opposite side of the platform, retired Detective Elijah Thorne smoked his pipe with the patience of men who have learned to listen to time. He wore a worn grey suit and carried in his briefcase a collection of newspaper clippings and a file that had never been closed. The case of a disappearance that had occurred exactly 13 years earlier, on the same train, on the same route. As he watched Lady Marlowe, his instincts sharpened. Something in her rigid posture, in the way she held the letter to her chest, spoke of more than mere travel anxiety. The train whistled. It was time to follow ancient ghosts on worn tracks. In the corridors of the train, the silence was broken only by the clink of spoons against porcelain cups and the creak of polished wooden skirting boards. The young steward Alistair Boone, with his gentle smile and restless eyes, observed the passengers with unusual attention. He knew how to recognize fear and hidden desire. It was his gift and his curse. As he brought tea to Lady Marlowe, he noticed the scar on her wrist and the fleeting glance she cast toward the dew-covered window. "Would you like some sugar, my lady?" he murmured, and she merely nodded, without taking her eyes off the night gathering beyond the red curtains. At 7:15 p.m., the locomotive wound its way through snowy fields, leaving behind the grey suburbs of London. In the dining car, whispered voices and lingering glances between strangers composed a silent opera of hidden intentions. A gentleman in a bowler had read from an occult book, while a Polish pianist with deformed fingers played dissonant notes on an out-of-tune piano. Detective Thorne, now with a glass of brandy in his hand, approached Lady Marlowe. "You look like a woman who has been on this train before," he said. She did not smile. "And you look like someone who never forgets a face." At 8:10 p.m., as the train was crossing the Durham Strait, an electrical failure turned off all the lights for exactly 52 seconds. In the darkness, a scream, feminine hoarse, interrupted, echoed in carriage number 5. When the lights came back on, a woman had disappeared. The stewardess said she was not even on the passenger list. The train was still moving, and at that moment, no one noticed the hooded figure walking along the outer platform between the carriages as if floating on the tracks. Compartment 13 of carriage number 5 had been officially sealed since 1934, after the unexplained disappearance of Lord Emmerich, Devonshire, heir to a tin mining fortune, who had boarded the train and never been seen again. But Alistair Boone swore he had seen it open that night as he passed by with the tray of brandy. The light inside flickered as if someone were breathing inside. He tried to force the handle, but it was cold, immobile, as if welded shut from the inside. The train shook. A whisper came through the wooden wall. "We are still waiting." Thorne called an informal meeting of the passengers who had witnessed the scream. A thick atmosphere hung in the reading car, where the scent of old leather and tobacco smoke created an almost theatrical setting. Lady Marlowe refused to comment, but her hand trembled as she stirred her tea. The pianist, named Ilona, murmured in Polish and seemed to look past the faces as if she were seeing something on the wall. The missing lady, was she wearing an emerald necklace? Ilona asked suddenly. The detective nodded. Then she will return. Meanwhile, in the last carriage where the servants slept, an anonymous note had been left on Alistair's bed. In shaky letters, the lady in the letter and the man in the briefcase must be separated. The past bleeds as it nears its end. Alarmed, he handed it to Thorne, who read it silently, and as he folded the paper, caught the scent of jasmine, the same fragrance worn by Violet Thorne, his wife, who had disappeared 13 years earlier on the same train. The clock read 10:14 p.m. when Lady Marlowe confided to the detective, "I received this letter 3 days ago. It has no return address, just a name, Violet Thorne. It said I should board today, that I would finally get some answers." The revelation hit Elijah like a blow. "My wife, did you know her?" "I loved her," Vivian replied, her tears streaming down her face. The train groaned on the tracks as if it were crying too. Thorne's eyes, once dry from searching, welled up under the shade of a flickering lamp. Returning to her compartment, Vivian found the window open and a handprint on the mirror. With her gloved finger, she touched the glass. A chill ran down her spine. Beside the bed lay a dried black rose, wrapped in a blue ribbon, the same one she had worn in her youth with Violet. The train seemed to have stopped, but the clock was ticking. She pulled back the curtain. No station, no light, just darkness and a figure in the distance walking along the edge of the tracks, waving slowly. The air inside the train had changed. It wasn't just the chill seeping through the cracks in the windows or the creak of the rails beneath the ancient wooden skirting boards. There was an invisible oppression, as if something here fed on the passengers' secrets. Elijah Thorne woke from a nap in the reading car to the sound of his pocket watch clattering to the floor. He had never been one to doze on duty, and he wasn't on duty. But Violet's name still echoed in his mind, as if he had just heard it whispered in his ear. The black rose, the letter, Vivian, everything lined up like pieces on a chessboard carefully manipulated by unseen hands. Alistair, driven by an impulse he himself did not understand, went down to the freight car, a section rarely visited except by train staff. He heard the metal door creak shut behind him and smelled rust and mothballs in the air. At the end of the corridor, a small blue suitcase caught his eye. Inside it was a leather-bound diary. The handwriting was familiar. Violet Thorne, February 1934. He flipped through the pages. Dates, accounts of disturbing dreams, exact descriptions of the train's corridors, names of passengers who would not be there for 13 years. And finally, the last sentence written before the ink faded completely. "The train does not take us north, it takes us back." At that very moment, Vivian was staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror of the compartment. The silhouette behind her, still shadowy, disappeared as soon as she turned. Her heart, already accustomed to loss and shadows, now beat as if to alert her to something greater than her own fear. She decided to go to Thorne and show him the blue ribbon. "It was hers," he confirmed, his voice breaking. "I used it to tie Violet's hair the day I proposed to her. It must no longer exist." She touched his hand. "I need to tell you what happened in 1934. He nodded. The revelation came like a whirlwind. Vivian and Violet had been lovers. They had run away together, but Violet had disappeared between York and Berwick. Vivian had never seen her again, until the letter 3 days ago. Thorne felt the world spin beneath the tracks. Memories came rushing back to him. The interrupted dinner, Violet's red dress, the open train window on that freezing night. He had not known about Vivian. He had not known she existed then. And now the two stories were joined like tracks that had miraculously crossed. He sat down, exhausted. What if the train never stopped for her? What if Violet is still on board? Vivian whispered, "Then we are not passengers, Elijah. We are prisoners." Outside, the snow was falling hard. Inside, reality was beginning to crack. The train was unnaturally quiet in the cab. When Alistair knocked on the door, there was no answer. He forced his way in. The cab was empty. No operator, no engineer. Just the train, chugging along on icy tracks and twisted trees. The clock read 1:13 a.m. In the background, there was a muffled sound, as if something was walking across the roof of the car, slowly, heavily, and for a moment, Alistair thought he heard a woman's laugh, distant, broken, like the sound of an old memory fading away. The train moved forward with a strange determination, as if the tracks were woven into time rather than space. The landscape outside no longer seemed real. The trees appeared distorted, like shadows from a forgotten forest, and the lights of the stations had completely disappeared. Elijah Thorne walked down the corridor with firm steps, as if trying to anchor himself to something concrete. Inside him, however, everything was falling apart. Vivian's revelation had been a blow, and also a bridge, the only real clue in 13 years of silence. For the first time, he admitted, he wasn't just looking for Violet, he was looking for himself. Meanwhile, Vivian retreated to the smoking carriage, where the darkness and the smell of burning wood reconnected her with a London that no longer existed. There she found Ilona, the pianist, playing a melodyless song, her eyes closed and her expression rapt. When the music stopped, Ilona opened her eyes and spoke without looking at her. "You and she are trapped on this train. It wasn't Violet who disappeared. It was you. And now the train is coming back to undo what was done." Vivian felt the air thin, as if reality was slipping through her fingers. "What do you know about Violet?" "She doesn't sing anymore," Ilona said, "but sometimes she whispers between the carriages." Alistair, determined to find out the reason for the engineer's absence, made his way to the top of the train using the emergency hatch. The wind was merciless, and darkness seemed to swallow the horizon. Walking with difficulty, he saw, at the top of the freight car, a female figure standing, long hair blowing in the wind, dressed in period costume, just like Violet in the old photographs. She turned for an instant, and her face was no longer human. It was a cracked mirror, reflecting only the one looking at her. Alistair fell to his knees, choking on his own fear. When he looked again, he was alone. Thorne returned to compartment 13, Vivian in tow. The doorknob, once cold and still, now seemed to vibrate. He touched it. The door creaked slowly. Inside was a beautifully preserved cabin. Fresh flowers, neatly arranged cushions, a lipstick on the dressing table. On the mirror was a sentence written in the same handwriting as the diary. "The key is in what is unsaid." Vivian knelt in front of the dressing table. Underneath the drawer, she found a small velvet box. Inside was a wedding ring, engraved with the initials VT and the date, February 14th, 1934, the day of Violet's last voyage. Vivian sobbed. She was going to ask me to marry her. In the dining room, all the other passengers had disappeared. The silverware still lay with traces of food on it. The cups shook slightly, as if a constant vibration ran through the carriages. Ilona sat alone, motionless, while Alistair returned, shaking, panting. "She's up there, but she's not herself anymore." She's caught between who she was and who she could have been. Thorn took him by the shoulders. No one leaves until the past is faced. Violet, she wants something, and it's not revenge. The engine let out a long, low whistle, like a lament from another time. In the darkness of the baggage car, Elijah Thorne sat with Violet's diary in his hands. He leafed through it slowly, searching for more than clues. He searched for regrets, words she might never have said to him in her lifetime. In the center of the diary, between pages glued together by time, he found a letter that had never been sent, addressed to Vivian. It was a choked goodbye. You won't understand my decision, but I have never stopped loving you. They're watching me. This train is not ours anymore. It was dated the day she disappeared. Thorne felt a wave of guilt. What if, in his obsession with finding her, he had overlooked the fact that she was running not from someone, but from something? Vivian stared at the ring in her hand as if it held her very soul. For the first time, she allowed herself to remember the sound of Violet's laughter, the way they had danced in the dark of the library in her Nottingham home, the night they had promised to run away together. But she also remembered the hesitation in Violet's eyes that last morning when she had said she would go alone and figure it out. She knew something was waiting for her inside. Vivian whispered, and yet she came inside. A tear fell onto the ring. Alistair, listening in the distance, felt a pang in his chest, as if her words echoed through his own history, through a love he had never dared to name. As they searched the final cars, Thorne, Vivian, and Alistair came to the last door, one that, according to the train maps, didn't exist. It was made of weathered iron, with burnt handprints etched into the metal. The air around it felt heavy, as if time itself resisted there. Approach. Elijah raised his flashlight and murmured, "Everything converges here." Without knowing exactly how, he pushed open the door. On the other side, there was no compartment. There was a circular room, its walls covered in weathered mirrors, and in the center, a velvet chair. In it, a woman, Violet Thorne, aged and yet intact. Time seemed to have touched her and retreated. Her eyes slowly opened at the sound of footsteps. "Elijah! Vivian!" she said hoarsely but firmly. "You took your time." Vivian ran to her but felt an invisible barrier. "Are you alive? Is this real?" "I'm in between," Violet replied. "This train is a cycle, a mistake in time, a place where souls trapped in unresolved dilemmas keep coming back until they understand why they left." Elijah whispered, "And you, why did you stay?" Violet stared at him in pain. "Because I never said goodbye to you, and because you never said goodbye to me." The engine shuddered. The mirrors began to vibrate, revealing images, not reflections, but memories. Vivian at the window, waiting for Violet. Elijah alone with a ring in his pocket. Alistair, a boy, listening to his mother disappear on the same train. The train was more than transportation. It was an echo. Violet reached out to Vivian. "You have to let me go." But Vivian hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. Elijah intervened, placing his hand over Vivian's. "To love is also to set free." A warm wind blew through the room. Violet smiled one last time. Then everything went dark, and the train sank into silence. The silence that followed Violet's appearance was not just an absence of sound, but a deep void, as if the train, the cars, and even time itself had stopped to contemplate the farewell. When the light returned, the hall of mirrors had disappeared. In its place, only the usual corridor remained, as if none of this had happened. Vivian was shaking, not from fear, but from absence. Violet was gone, and with her, something inside Vivian had also been released. Elijah supported her by the arm. "She's gone." And now perhaps the train will allow us to move on. Alistair, still processing what he had seen, led them to the driver's cabin, where before there had been no one. Now a man in a black suit lay motionless, his face covered in a veil of soot. The controls on the dashboard worked by themselves, as if guided by a programmed memory. Elijah approached and cautiously removed the veil. There was no face, only a mirror. He saw himself, then Vivian, then Violet. "It's the memory conductor," Ilona murmured, appearing behind them without warning. "It carries unresolved pain until the passengers accept the end." In the dining room, the other passengers began to reappear, but something about them had changed. They looked at each other strangely, as if they didn't know how they had gotten there. One man asked for his wife, another for his daughter. A woman said she had boarded in 1931. The boundaries of time were collapsing. Thorn gathered everyone together and spoke firmly. "This train has imprisoned us because we refuse to release the dead. Each of you is here because there is something that needs to be accepted. No one leaves without facing the truth." Ilona nodded. "Or the cycle starts all over again. It always does." Vivian returned to compartment 13 and, standing in front of the now clean mirror, removed her mourning veil. She undid her hair in a bun, washed her face with cold water from the enamel sink, and looked at herself for the first time in years. Not as the woman she had been waiting for, but as the one who had survived. "I'm letting you go, Violet, and I'm taking myself with me." Outside the door, Alistair listened with teary eyes. This woman had found what he had been searching for most: courage. Courage to let go. He returned to his cabin and from under his pillow took an old photograph of his mother smiling on the Euston platform and placed it on the bedside table. "Goodbye, Mom." At 5:47 a.m., the train crossed the Newcastle Suspension Bridge. The first visible station in hours appeared ahead, lit by a faint orange glow. A cool breeze blew through the cracks in the windows. For the first time, birdsong could be heard. The driver was still a mirror, but now the passengers saw themselves in it, not as they were, but as they could be. Thorn looked at Vivian, and they walked to the exit door. The train had been a tomb of secrets, but now it was a rite of passage. The train slowed to a stop that no map had shown. The weathered sign was barely read. Ardbridge Halt. The stone walls were covered in ancient ivy and drifting snow. There were no staff, no sign of life, but a faint melody could be heard between the pillars. The same one Violet used to play on the piano in the Thorn house. "It's not a destination," Elijah murmured. "It's a choice." The three of them, he, Vivian, and Alistair, descended together, guided by an instinct that was no longer fear but acceptance. As they stepped onto the platform, the air felt lighter. It was as if time had suspended itself here, a threshold between past and future, between pain and release. Vivian walked to a wrought iron bench where a small music box sat. When she opened it, the melody stopped. Inside was a note in Violet's handwriting. "You found me. Now find yourself." The woman closed her eyes and smiled. It was the end of a wait that had lasted decades, and also the beginning of something new, lighter, without chains. Alistair looked down the mist-shrouded tracks and saw a child running in the opposite direction toward the train. It was him, a boy searching for his mother, who had left without saying goodbye. But this time, he did not run after her. He stood still, and as if by some subtle trick of time, the childlike figure stopped, looked at him, and smiled. His mother, in the distance, reached out her hand. She said nothing, but in that silence there was forgiveness. Alistair fell to his knees. He cried, but not from sadness. He cried because he had found himself. Thorn, alone beneath the ancient station clock, struck the last match and watched the flickering flame. He remembered the first time he had seen Violet, with her stormy eyes and rebellious soul. Now there was no doubt. She had made the sacrifice. She had boarded the train not to escape, but to stop others from being taken. And she had succeeded. "You were stronger than all of us," she whispered, and the flame went out. When he turned, Vivian was reaching out to him. No promises, just presence. The train whistled again. It was leaving, but it was no longer carrying them. It would continue on with other passengers, other destinies, other pains to redeem. Elijah, Vivian, and Alistair remained on the platform, watching the locomotive disappear into the morning mist. And when the last carriage disappeared into the white horizon, the world seemed to breathe again. The station, previously faded, began to gain color. The clock started working again, and the sun finally split the grey sky with a golden beam. Time at Ardbridge Station seemed to have no ordinary laws. Minutes slipped by like memories, and the sun, still low on the horizon, painted everything with a farewell amber light. Elijah walked around, exploring the abandoned buildings around the platform. He entered an old telegraph room, where the machines were still dusty but intact. On one of them, he found a final letter. No envelope, no recipient, dated the following day. The words, written in dark ink, were his. "I found peace where I never thought I would find it, on a train that never left, among voices that never stopped." He didn't remember writing it, and yet he knew it was his. Vivian sat beneath the rusted station sign, staring out at the horizon where the train had disappeared. For the first time in decades, her chest felt empty, as if Violet's absence was now a light, not a shadow. Alistair silently approached her and handed her Violet's diary. "You were supposed to be the keeper of this," he said. "She wrote about you on almost every page." Vivian held the diary to her chest, her hands shaking. "And yet," she said, "she disappeared without saying goodbye. Maybe because I always knew that real love doesn't say goodbye. It only transforms." On the tracks, Elijah and Alistair found an ancient key buried beneath a mossy rock. It was small, ornate, with a gold serpent symbol. Beside it, an iron plaque had fallen to the ground, inscribed in Latin, "Mortem in vita, vitam in morte." Death in life, life in death. Elijah, who had learned Latin in his youth, was silent for a moment. "It wasn't just a train," he murmured. "It was a veil, between this world and something greater, or older." Alistair stared at the invisible tracks that ran ahead, and we turned back to find our way out. Ilona, the pianist, reappeared briefly, walking barefoot through the station, her black dress dragging on the wet stones. When she passed Vivian, she simply nodded. "I'll play one more time for her," she said. In the abandoned departure lounge, an old piano stood untouched, and Ilona, before its yellowed keys, played a melody that seemed to contain the sound of all departures, of all letters never sent, and of all doors never opened. It was sad, and also beautiful, as all inevitable endings are. As the music echoed through the station, the shadows began to recede. The fog dissolved, and on the walls, ancient handprints, like ghosts leaving their signatures, began to fade. Elijah, Vivian, and Alistair looked at each other. They were no longer trapped, and not because they had escaped, but because they had finally understood what had held them back. The pain, the regret, the fear of remembering. The train had left, yes, but it had also set them free. The sun was rising, the station was breathing, and the day was finally beginning. At the edge of the station, now partially illuminated by the morning sun, Vivian watched the tracks disappear into the thinning mist. The loneliness that had consumed her for so long was now filled with a different stillness, that of someone who had outlived herself. She sat beneath the rusty Ardbridge Halt sign, clutching the diary to her chest, and finally began to write something on the blank pages at the end. Not for Violet, not for Thorn, but for herself. I have existed beyond love, beyond waiting, and now I exist beyond the train. The handwriting was firm. For the first time in many years, Elijah, for his part, walked to the end of the platform, where a half-open iron gate led into a small grove of trees. There, he found the bench where he had used to sit with Violet in their youth, long before trains and goodbyes. It couldn't possibly be there, and yet it was. He sat down, took off his hat, and let the wind blow away his grey hair. He pulled out his pocket watch and saw that the hands were turning in the opposite direction. He smiled. "It's all right. Violet, I'll let you go, and I'll take myself with me." And he closed his eyes, not in weariness, but in peace. Alistair met Ilona for the last time, still at the piano. She smiled and said, "Some passengers are just notes in an old melody. You were the pause that kept the music from ending too soon." He didn't understand, but he nodded. Then she disappeared between one note and the next, as if she had never been there. Alistair walked over to the old carriage that still lay on the disused track beside the station. Inside, he found only a covered mirror. When he removed the cloth, he saw no reflection, just the image of a boy hugging his mother at Euston Station in 1934. And that was enough. The landscape slowly regained the colours that the train had drained from it. The greenish tones of the leaves, the pale gold of the sky, the shy blue between the clouds. Elijah returned to the platform with calm steps. Vivian looked up when she saw him. "Are you leaving? For the first time?" "No," she answered. "I think I'll stay. Just for a moment longer." The two sat side by side. There were no more urgent words, no more unanswered questions. Life, however short or long, always left something behind. And in that moment, they both understood. The train had brought them here not so they could run away, but so they could stay. In the distance, they heard the whistle blow again. But it wasn't the same train. This one was coming in reverse, from the north. A new train, different souls, different pains. The cycle would never end. But now, the burden was no longer theirs. Elijah stood. Vivian followed. Alistair approached, his eyes shining. The trio walked away from the platform as the mist embraced them one last time. It wasn't an escape. It was a rebirth. The old station clock stopped at 6:14, and the Ardbridge sign, once dim, now glowed softly in the golden light of day. The mist that had covered the fields around Ardbridge Station was beginning to clear, revealing a landscape that seemed to belong to no specific time, neither the present nor the past. It was as if the world itself had suspended itself to welcome the silent departure of three passengers who had finally found themselves again. Elijah, Vivian, and Alistair followed a narrow stone path, leaving behind the invisible track where so many had been trapped. None of them knew exactly where they were going, but for once it didn't matter. Vivian stood before a frozen lake that rose at the foot of the hill. The still waters reflected the sky like a broken mirror. She knelt at its edge, took the blue ribbon from her pocket, and threw it onto the icy surface. The ribbon floated briefly before sinking soundlessly. That simple gesture carried the weight of a lifetime. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered, no longer in pain, but in gratitude. Elijah came closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You found her, and you found yourself on the way." Vivian smiled with her eyes. "Now I can walk on my own. 2 feet. No more between wagons or memories." Ahead, Alistair found the old dirt road that led to town. It had been there forever, but only now was it visible. In his pocket he carried a page from Violet's diary, which he had torn out silently. It read, "Some destinies cannot be avoided, but they can be understood. And that changes everything." He put the paper away, lifted his face to the sun, and took a deep breath. The shadow of his childhood that had haunted him so much now walked beside him, not as a ghost, but as part of the journey. At 6:42 a.m., a new train whistled in the distance, but it didn't slow down. It passed straight through Ardbridge Station, as if it were invisible to the naked eye. Inside it, other faces, other pains, maybe other Violets, other Vivians, other Thorns. And so it would go on, because the train, like time, doesn't stop. It just keeps moving. And on each of its journeys, it drags along those who don't yet know they need to stop. On the empty platform, the music box played by itself, its lid open to the wind. One last melody before the silence. Elijah Thorne, hat in hand, watched the horizon. Vivian beside him and Alistair, a few steps behind, stood motionless for a moment, as if paying respect to that track where they had lost so much, and from which they now emerged whole. Then the three of them turned and walked on, along the narrow road toward the world they had left waiting. The train disappeared into the fog, like a secret that remains silent, and the station, once asleep, went back to sleep, waiting for new souls, new sins, new chances for forgiveness. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and activate notifications so you don't miss future content. See you later.